Welcome to the SVG-TV News for Tuesday, January 11th. I'm Khalil Kato with the details. Minister of Finance Camilo Gonzalez, who presented the 2022 budget yesterday, and Minister of Urban Development Julian Francis are the latest government MPs to test positive for COVID-19. The announcement was made in Parliament this morning by Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, who said Minister Gonzalez and Minister Francis tested positive for the virus through a rapid antigen test as required for entrance into the chamber of the House of Assembly. The Prime Minister also noted that two other members of the government side, namely Deputy Prime Minister Montgomery Daniel and Senator Kiesel Peters, were experiencing digestion problems and were therefore unable to attend Parliament. The development forced the suspension of the budget debate until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
4 persons not be able to be present because of COVID, and 2 because of a digestion issue, as I understand it. I was not to be here this morning because I had some other matters, and everything we would have been able to have quite easily the 6 members which we were to have, but for the development with 3 of them. Well, as it turned out, 4 of them. And I can understand, sorry, the leader of the opposition not wanting to deliver his address, either in the absence of the Minister of Finance or the Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister. But I think it is fair and reasonable in all the circumstances to not continue today.
Prime Minister Gonzalez further mentioned that some of his security detail at the Prime Minister's residence have also tested positive for COVID. However, he has tested negative.
So I said that all of us up there at the residence for interacting with one another should be tested. Fortunately, as I indicated to you, I gave you the document that I was tested negative yet again, and I'm very happy about that. But we have the numbers which we say 6 members here. That's why we could, and we are not taking any quorum issue, that's why we can commence. But it would be invidious and contrary to the rules. Well, not the rules in their literal sense, in the spirit of the rules. And I really think that the country should hear the leader of the opposition's response.
Over the weekend, Minister of Agriculture Soboto Caesar and Minister of Education Curtis King were diagnosed during testing for all MPs ordered by the Chief Medical Officer Dr. Simone Kieser-Beach ahead of the start of the 2022 budget presentation and debate. PM Gonzalez said that the situation in Parliament with ministers testing positive is a situation that is happening in all workplaces across the island, and that the current challenge he will be debating, with that current challenge, he will be debating the 2022 budget on behalf of those ministers who are unable to do so because of their COVID status.
The prudent thing for me would not to speak before the conclusion of the debate as a whole, and therefore in my allotted 4 hours as Prime Minister, I can at one and the same time, Madam Speaker, do my wrapping up, my own contribution, and wrap up to the debate itself. I'm quite sure the Minister of Finance would listen on radio or television and would pass particular notes for me to address this or that issue. In the same way that Minister Caesar has already sent me at my request. I received yesterday from him, yesterday evening, an outline of what he essentially was going to speak to. And Minister King has promised to do the same thing. Probably as I'm speaking, it may well be at my office. And I'm quite sure that Minister Francis will do likewise. So in essence, I'll be speaking for the Minister of Finance in his wrapping up, the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries and Rural Transformation and Forestry, Minister of Urban Development and Local Government, Airports, and for the Minister of Education. And of course, myself. Fortunately, the government is one composite government, and I'm familiar with all of this.
Meanwhile, at a news conference this afternoon, opposition leader Dr. Godwin Friday said that the safety of his colleagues is of paramount importance, hence he supports the suspension of the budget debate today. Dr. Friday said that when he learned of the 2 additional government ministers who tested positive for COVID-19 this morning, he spoke to the Speaker of the House of Assembly and told her that the situation has become untenable and he and his colleagues no longer feel safe in the chamber.
In consultation with them, we took a decision to leave the Parliament building and not to return for the day, at least, until the situation became clearer and until the Chief Medical Officer had considered and weighed in on the matter. COVID-19 is serious and we must protect ourselves. I want my colleagues to be safe and to feel safe when we show up for work at the Parliament building to do the people's business. We know that is important business, but I don't think that in the circumstances, the risk of infection would override the need to have the Parliament done today. This can be done at some other time.
Dr. Friday said that he awaits word from the Chief Medical Officer before returning to Parliament tomorrow, noting that he hopes changes would be made to the existing protocols.
The time frame and so forth for getting this done would seem to be still very much on, that we can have a prudent postponement until the matter of the safety and availability of members can be addressed and be assured that that would happen. And so I agree with you that this notion that somehow, you have to get this thing done tomorrow or else is quite a hasty situation that I am hoping and expecting, quite frankly, that the Chief Medical Officer will have an input in it today.
And in Parliament yesterday afternoon, just before the start of the budget presentation, Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves asked for consideration to have those ministers who have tested positive for COVID-19 to put through their vote on the appropriations bill via the telephone. This was rejected by the opposition leader, who deemed the request as premature. However, PM Gonsalves made it clear that he is prepared to have the COVID-19 positive ministers come to the Parliament to cast their vote to ensure the passage of the 2022 budget.
And clearly, there is a full expectation that all of us who are able to be present by virtue of us not being encumbered by any public health restriction, that we'll be here to vote. But as you well put it, Madam Speaker, just in case, that's all we are doing. We are alerting in advance a possibility, faint as that possibility at the moment may well be, but it would be a strange thing for us to do all the debates and that COVID defeats us in having the bill passed.
However, the opposition leader has termed the statement made by the Prime Minister that he was prepared to call his COVID-19 positive MPs to Parliament to vote on the 2022 budget to ensure its passage as irresponsible, and it sends a bad message to the people of SVG. At today's news conference, Dr. Friday said the main reason he gave for not supporting the Prime Minister's request is that the rules do not permit for voting by telephone.
And to me, that is irresponsible talk. It sends a very bad message that there's one rule for everybody else and one for the government as it suits their convenience, their circumstances. It cannot be permitted. This is a government that sent teachers and public servants home, refused them entry to their workplaces, because they were unvaccinated, even though they had not tested positive for COVID. And the suggestion that because the government had businesses wanted to conclude that members who had tested positive and who would not be available for voting in person in the House might be able to attend to vote even though they are positive.
Dr. Friday said that the Prime Minister's position is a very damaging one to adopt, and it sends a wrong message to the members of the public on how the government takes public health concerns about COVID-19.
I mean, there are other employers who may have exigent circumstances, serious matters, that they may want a specific employee to come in. If the employee tests positive, you're going to say, well, boy, you're only going to be here for half an hour, come in and fix this thing for me, and then you can go back home because I need it done urgently. No, the protocol is that you stay in isolation until the medical officers tell you that you're cleared to end the isolation. It's not just a matter of what is convenient or what is required by your own personal circumstances. So that is something that, unfortunately, sends the wrong message to the people of this country, and it has done considerable harm, in my view, to the perception as to how seriously this government takes the public health concerns of COVID and the risk of infection.
Dr. Friday made it clear that he and his colleagues will stay away from Parliament if any of the members who tested positive for COVID-19 is allowed in the chamber to participate in the proceedings. Meanwhile, in his presentation of the 2022 budget in Parliament yesterday, Minister of Finance Camilo Gonzalez said the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic looms largely over the fiscal package, while acknowledging the pandemic is far from over. He said the health and development challenges of COVID-19 and the inequalities that it has exposed have been felt everywhere. And like in every other country in the world, it is now clear that it will take SVG many years to recover from the extraordinary health and economic challenges of COVID-19, but that he is confident the country will recover. Minister Gonzalez said in light of this, Budget 2022 takes a multi-pronged, far-reaching approach to address the health and economic impacts of the pandemic. He said other than hiring more medical personnel, providing the Ministry of Health with the resources needed to prevent, treat and test for COVID infections, they will also procure and store more vaccines and boosters.
The budget also provides $2.5 million to procure COVID testing kits and supplies, whose utility is self-evident. In 2021, as severe infections rose globally, we noted the challenges that many countries were having in ensuring an adequate supply of oxygen to COVID patients. Unfortunately, high demand and supply chain challenges meant that it was very difficult to immediately increase our capacity to produce oxygen. We addressed this problem by purchasing 280 additional oxygen canisters and utilizing our existing private oxygen producers to fill those surplus tanks to create a life-saving buffer supply in times of increased need. The arrival of the first 80 canisters last year successfully took us through 2021 without any oxygen shortage. Last week, another 200 canisters arrived in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We have thus far effectively tripled our stock of available oxygen. Budget 2022 has additional resources available, if necessary, to further buttress our oxygen tank buffer.
Stressing that the economic impact of the pandemic is expected to last a long time, the finance minister said Budget 2022 contains further targeted, temporary and self-limiting stimulus activity and an additional one-off support payment that will be phased out before they can create a permanent fiscal drag.
These include a further round of modest income support to entertainers who have experienced another lost carnival, and curtail the Christmas season. An allocation of $1 million to community improvement projects is designed to put villagers to work on activities that will both benefit locals and generate income. The augmentation of the venerable YES program serves a similar purpose. But Budget 2022 is also more far-reaching in its fresh approaches to addressing the worst lingering impacts of the pandemic. We recognize that COVID did not so much change the direction of the world as it accelerated a series of economic and geopolitical trends that were already underway. As COVID-19 has increased the speed of global change, so too must we accelerate our economic transformation and increase the urgency of our innovative policies to address inequality, infrastructural deficiencies, operational inefficiencies, insufficient maintenance, informality, and high logistics costs.
The finance minister, however, noted that the overriding threat to SVG's economic recovery remains vaccine hesitancy, which they will be seeking to address.
Make no mistake, there is very little in this budget that can properly succeed in the absence of a substantially vaccinated population. There is no return to any semblance of normalcy without vaccination now and in the immediate future. St. Vincent and the Grenadines lags well behind our neighbors in terms of vaccination rates. There are few nations in the developing world that have been more fortunate than St. Vincent and the Grenadines in procuring vaccines, yet more hesitant to take them. We have donated thousands of vaccines to sister nations whose citizens have eagerly lined up to receive their protection. Meanwhile, many of us have chosen to delay and dither when faced with the fierce urgency of the moment.
Minister of Finance Camilo Gonzalez presented a budget in Parliament yesterday amounting to 1.33 billion EC dollars with an overall deficit of $366 million. Giving a breakdown of the fiscal year, the finance minister said there will be no new tax measures for citizens in light of the challenging times facing the country.
Current revenue of $677.5 million, and you minus current expenditure of $627 million to get a current account deficit of $49.5 million. You add grants of $69.7 million and capital revenue of $1 million to get net funds available for capital expenditure of $21.2 million, less capital expenditure of $397.5 million, which will be financed by external loans of $211.6, local loans of $104, other capital receipts of $265.4, from which you then subtract amortization of $182 million and sinking fund of $22 million. There are no new tax measures in Budget 2022. In light of the enormous challenges that we faced in 2021, and due to the uncertainty surrounding the pandemic and its potential impacts on inflation, tourism, and the pace of the global recovery, it is difficult to forecast either the revenue gains or the socioeconomic impacts of any such measures.
Minister Gonzalez outlined the allocation of funds for the fiscal year, with Economic Affairs accounting for the highest allocation of $177.3 million.
General Public Services, $22.6 million. Public Order and Safety, $7.3 million. Economic Affairs, $177.3 million. Environmental Protection, $71.3 million. Housing and Community Amenities, $22.6 million. Health, $24.4 million. Recreation, Culture and Religion, $6.9 million.
The finance minister also announced in his budget presentation that the government will be revising taxes on imported vehicles with the aim of making newer vehicles more affordable to Vincentians. According to Minister Gonzalez, the revision will take place in the early part of this year as they seek to address the high taxes vehicles attract and will be looking to incentivize newer vehicles.
The local used car market in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is underdeveloped relative to our neighbors. A Vincentian consumer is far more likely to buy a 12-year-old car on a Japanese website than they are to purchase one that is resold locally. Over the course of the year, we have listened to the concerns of both consumers and automobile retailers and undertaken our internal analytical work, and we're now prepared to address the issue. During fiscal year 2022 and very early in fiscal year 2022, the taxation regime for motor vehicles will be reviewed with the following objectives in mind: to incentivize the purchase of newer vehicles, to reduce the import taxes for hybrid and electric vehicles, and to restructure the surtax regime for all motor vehicles, including the prohibition on vehicles older than 12 years old. The result of these reforms will be to reduce taxation on all vehicles, but the greatest incentives will go to purchase newer vehicles and/or cars with smaller, more efficient engines.
The finance minister said that the calculations for any buyer will know beforehand the overall cost of the vehicle purchased, noting that they are leaning towards the importation of more hybrid vehicles.
We are currently working on making the system easy to understand, because we had an equation, but it would be very difficult for the average consumer to follow. And in adjusting the existing online calculators so that purchasers will know what their final cost will be before they click buy on the website. These changes will be accommodated within the new harmonized commodity description and coding system, HS 2017, Common and External Tariff, which will be implemented in this fiscal year. HS 2017 will introduce classification headings for hybrid and electric motor vehicles, and we hope to increase the purchase of hybrid vehicles in particular, because purely electric vehicles don't perform as well in hilly areas without straight highways to recharge as they do in some other locales.
The minister added that they have noticed that only 3% of new imported vehicles are in country, and this has to change.
In public discussion on the level of taxation levied on imported vehicles. In some instances, the effective tax rate can be as high as 135% of the cost, insurance, and freight value of the vehicle. As a consequence, the motor vehicle fleet on the island is on average 11 years old, with an average total landed cost of $27,000. It does not escape our notice that we imposed a prohibition on the importation of cars older than 12 years old, and that the average age of a car in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is 11 years old.
On Monday, November 24, 2021, government signed a joint communique to establish diplomatic relations with the Republic of Burundi. Her Excellency Inga Rhonda King, Permanent Representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the United Nations and Permanent Representative of the Republic of Burundi to the UN, signed the joint communique on behalf of the governments of both countries. A news release from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs says the joint communique to establish relations between both countries is guided by the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter and international law, particularly the respect and promotion of international peace and security, equality among states, due respect for national sovereignty and territorial integrity, independence and international treaties, and non-interference in internal affairs of states. Recently, St. Vincent and the Grenadines also signed a joint communique with the Republic of Rwanda to establish diplomatic relations between both countries. It is anticipated that by year-end, several other African countries will sign communiques with SVG to establish diplomatic relations.